Nun kommen wir zu einem weiteren Referenten des heutigen Tages.
And now it's time for the next lecturer today. I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Holger Strohm. He's a man who talks about nuclear power plants and their real danger. Political groups have stated about Holger Strohm that he is Germany's last universal genius, whatever that might be. We are dealing with a man of an enormous caliber and great knowledge. He has been nominated for 3 different Nobel Prizes by hundreds of individuals, Nobel Prize winners, entrepreneurs and politicians from over a dozen countries. Of course, we have already heard about the Nobel Prize today. But for those who joined us just now, the Nobel Prize is a prize awarded by the Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel for extraordinary scientific achievements in different areas. These include physics, medicine, literature, and so on. I think Dr. Strohm stands for outstanding accomplishments on the subject of literature. He is an author of more than 100 books, of which more than 50 have been published, and he has earlier devoted a few books of his to me. I myself am an author of more than 20 books, so I kinda know what it means to write a book. Dr. Strohm has shown me his PhD thesis, 1 book out of those 100, and this book alone has 1,300 pages. That is almost a telephone book size. Incredible what this man has achieved, really. We can also hear about him that he has the ability to summarize hundreds of books and present the knowledge in condensed form in 1 lecture or even 1 book alone. Many call him, as I said before, a universal genius because of this. Dr. Strohm is an advisor of the League, if I may say so, of the upper 10,000. He has advised US authorities and senators as well as the Committee of Interior Affairs of the German Bundestag. He has been active as an advisor for boards of the United Nations and prime ministers. For example, Holger Strohm turned Olaf Palme into an opponent of nuclear power, and he developed the Scandinavian School for him, which is known as the best schooling system in the world. Of course, today we don't want to argue about which schooling system is better than the others. These are merely witness testimonies and what they have claimed. I suggest we are just going to listen to Dr. Strohm right now. My opinion is, just let us listen to what he has to say. We do not often have the chance to meet a personality like him. The man has in fact written 3 doctoral theses, and now I simply introduce to you Dr. Strohm. Thank you very much for coming to Switzerland. We are very happy that you are here and very excited to hear what you have to say to us.
Thank you very much. I was always very pleased to be in Switzerland. Here I've held many lectures in the 70s and 80s. Now I would like to say a word about the short trailer we just watched. I have written 2 books. They are back there, Banking Mafia and Euro Mafia, in which these things are discussed more precisely. About the Kennedys. The father, Joseph Kennedy, was a capo di tutti, one of the highest mafiosi of America, and his 2 sons have resisted the mafia, and, well, it's clear what happens then. And to my previous speaker about being scientific, as previously mentioned, I have written several doctor theses. All of them have been rejected. And after that, the professors got well ahead with their careers. At my last doctoral thesis, I had to go to court, where the judges were shocked of the level of criminal energy, and where they asked, where are we living anyway, when public professors think they can simply break the law as they please. Now we originally wanted to show a short trailer. I just keep talking until that is ready. The trailer is from the film Quietly into Disaster, which consists of the main movie and nearly 4 hours of bonus material with interviews of the best critical senior scientists and representatives of citizens' initiatives. It is based on my bestseller, Quietly into Disaster, that was already published in 1973. There are 4,000 literature sources in this book, and it has now been republished while not a single error has been found until today. We have sent this book to over 4,000 of the most influential personalities and individuals in Germany, Switzerland, and elsewhere via registered mail, so that they never again could claim that they did not know anything about this topic. This led to my second occupational prohibition, and then a third one followed, relating to me being an author, where all my books had been taken from the market to be destroyed. And we call this democracy.
Great Spirit, Great Spirit, Great Spirit, hear my prayer, hear my prayer, hear my
prayer. The sad truth is that we have already opened Pandora's box, and there is no way back into a world safe from the nuclear madness.
What is happening at the moment is basically like taking off by plane and there is no runway to land on.
We have launched a hellfire on Earth and we will never be able to extinguish it. Once released into the biosphere, this menace can circulate freely. We, the intelligent human race, are about to poison ourselves for eternity and wipe out our offspring in the most brutal manner.
This means that, in my words, any dealing with this form of energy is a crime against humanity. This is why the century we are facing will either be a century of total reconstruction or a century of violence and struggle for over-distribution, and I would like to say of the decivilization of mankind. These are the alternatives we are facing today.
I know a team of young professionals from the Media Academy in Hamburg, and they said to me, Holger, nobody wants to read something like this today. The young people are fixed and moving pictures. We have to do something new and modern to reach them. Now I'm asking myself, where does all this motivation come from? That young people work on movie for years without payment. One of them is Eva Mattis, for example, a well-known movie actress, or Gunther Schoß, who has been called Germany's best dubbing actor. All of them have been working on this film without asking for money. Usually a movie of this kind would cost around about $1 million. We managed to get it done for 100,000, and I'm still in debt with 40,000. Since my task was to pay the bills, what I gladly did. I wonder why people do that. Martin Rees, former president of the Association for the Advancements of Science, which is America's most known scientific organization, that also publishes the magazine Science, and who later became president of the Royal Society of Science, has started in the beginning of this millennium that if we continue on our current path, probably nobody would reach the next century. None of us. Paul Crutzen and a few dozen Nobel Prize winners wrote a few days later in Nature, "We have reached the point of no return. Half of the ocean's plankton has disappeared. That means our main source of oxygen. The coral reefs and bees are dying. The jungles and forests are cut down in countries like Indonesia and Brazil without restraints. The waters and oceans are full of plastic. We are practically cutting all roots and branches we are sitting on." In 2007, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, once founded by 28 Nobel laureates, among them Einstein, published an edition 5 minutes to midnight, in which many articles warned that we are going extinct by nuclear arms and nuclear power, nanotechnology, genetic manipulation, and a combination of the two, climate changes, and so on, and that there is a 90% chance that man will not reach the next century. Here we are talking about our grandchildren. We extinct our grandchildren and are feeling really good with it. Nobody wants to know. These are the highest scientific committees, and even the National Academy of Science has warned us. But the media have not written a single word about this. Yet, on the other hand, we are served the guilt of our grandfathers on a platter at the breakfast table each single day, to feel ashamed. This serves to distract us from the greatest crime of humanity that is actively happening right now today. If God has created life and the Genesis, then some people act as devils who are willingly seeking to destroy it. This is truly satanic. Nuclear power plants are one of these dangers. For each megawatt of nuclear power, the equivalent radioactivity of a nuclear bomb like Hiroshima is created each year. The radioactivity is not blown out into the atmosphere, but rather gets diluted at the ground and is at a much longer half-time. Our nuclear reactors today have a capacity of 1,300 megawatt, and their fuel rods remain in the reactor for 6 years. This means 1,300 Hiroshima bombs by 6. Additionally, there is a higher level of burn-off and even greater units of nuclear power plants exist. After 6 years, these reactors contain the radioactive potential of approximately 8,000 Hiroshima bombs. Chernobyl, in contrast, contained hardly any radioactivity because it was a military reactor which produced weapon-grade plutonium. Uranium exists as isotope 235 and 238, but only uranium-235 is fissionable. The isotope 238 is not. The amount of uranium-235 exists only about 0.3% in nature. It has to be enriched to at least 3%, which happens in centrifuges. Plutonium, on the other hand, which exists as isotopes 239, 240, and so on, it is very hard to separate. Because of this, the Russians have created a special construction where the fuel elements could be exchanged after 3 days, so that the newly created plutonium could be separated more easily in so-called reprocessing plants. So we see that there is an enormous potential of radioactivity in our Western reactors. 0.3 milligrams of radioactive material are created with every single kilowatt, enough to kill over 1,000 people. So this material has to be rigorously isolated and contained. And for this, reactor safety is the purpose. In Switzerland and Germany, There are neither Swiss nor German reactors. Instead, they are manufactured via license from US companies, General Electric and Westinghouse. And they had a great deal of trouble proving that their reactors were safe. And so, 230 grave reactor problems have been manipulated and falsified in order to obtain the license quietly. Richard Webb, who is one of the leading reactor experts and who has also participated in building the first reactors, has once stated in an interview that every pressure vessel that contains the fuel rods can break easily. This happens through brittle fractures caused by the radioactivity, which shuts atoms out of the metal's crystal structure so the container starts to dissolve or crack. He also said that Chernobyl reactor was much safer than the common German reactors, something we rarely like to hear. There are so many problems left unsolved. Our old reactors are not protected against plane crashes, earthquakes, and so on. None of these reactors would get a license today. There are also new problems that have just been discovered recently. Protuberances, for example, which are large sun eruptions. The plasma from the sun is thrown into Earth's direction and all of our electronics will melt and fail. Wires we use, our motors with the copper rings, computers, everything is destroyed. And the problem is that even reactors can have nuclear excursions and even nuclear bombs and hydrogen bombs might explode by the plasma. The National Academy of Sciences has warned about years ago from such large outbreaks. Up to that point, none has ever considered this scenario because protuberances of this magnitude only occur about every 150 years. The last one happened in 1857, where all electronic equipment that existed at that time got destroyed. Nuclear incidents can also happen for other reasons. Take sabotage or terrorism, for example. Any bazooka can be used to destroy a reactor. You simply shoot right through. And we know that there are many asylum seekers now coming from Chechnya or from Libya, where they have tortured or killed, and they are rather skilled with a bazooka. But frankly, anyone who has been with the army is able to do this. You simply drive there with a pickup van with 2 or 3 people on the back, and everyone takes his best shot, and that's the end for our nation. A country of the size of Switzerland would quickly become uninhabitable. We had several known incidents in the world so far. In Fukushima, in Chernobyl, but also prior in Windscale, Great Britain, in Kirchtem, Russia, or in Harrisburg, USA. Not to mention the thousands of smaller incidents that happen every year. Now, if such an accident happens, what is being done? In Germany, there exists a Technical Inspection Agency report, the so-called 3-hour report, which proves that it takes that long for the radioactive cloud to reach our cities, and then nobody can be evacuated any longer, because if these people will be contaminated at a severe accident, they will radiate themselves and are a danger for those who are not yet as much contaminated. Switzerland is very densely populated. I just drove through it. You see one town after the next. Where should all these people go to in case of accidents? Since European Union regulations demand that the borders would be closed instantly. Or take Germany. How would we evacuate the major urban centers around Munich, Stuttgart, the Ruhr territory, Frankfurt, Berlin or Hamburg? In Hamburg, you would have to drive over the few Elbe bridges, and you could only go to north, because east leads to the Baltic Sea and west leads to the North Sea, and Denmark would simply close its borders. But then there's yet another problem. These people radiate. There has been the case of Harold McCluskey, an American atomic worker, who had not been contaminated by 1,200 different substances like the ones that form in a reactor, but merely by one substance, americium, of which he had absorbed only small amounts. He had to be laid into a bed made of lead that weighed several tons. This bed could be moved up and down with a crane. Half a dozen doctors, wearing protective fallout suits, respirators, lead glass visors, and steel manipulators, performed a surgery on him. After that, he had to stay inside this room for half a year. His air had to be filtered because he was breathing out radioactivity, while his faces were taken out and his food was brought in using conveyors. He survived. And when people are exposed to high levels of radioactivity, they themselves start to radiate. For the support of the book Quietly into Disaster, we placed full-page commercials in every major daily and weekly newspaper in which we attacked ministers. I would like to read the one from Stern. Mr. Apel, who was Minister of Defense back in these days. Usually we are learning how military maneuvers pan out in the end. In the new book, Quietly into Disaster, we can read about maneuvers that deal with nuclear accidents. In that situation, the Kiel Channel would serve as a border behind which contaminated women, men and children would have to be held back. None would be allowed to cross the bridges. Tanks would be guarding them with the order to shoot. Maybe you did not tell us anything about these maneuvers because they would be no winners this time. Don't tell us you have not known about this. You are in the possession of the book. At the end of April, registered mail was sent to all members of the federal government, the Parliament, the People's Chamber of the German Democratic Republic, the national and federal councils in Switzerland, to all federal judges, and so on. The same registered mail containing a copy of the new book Quietly into Disaster. So all of them should know about the extreme dangers, and all of them should recognize that you cannot really help people in the case of a nuclear accident. If you want to treat radioactive contaminated people, the process is very complicated. You have to exchange the blood and the spinal marrow. If people have absorbed too much radiation, their skin starts to shed and peel. The lobster rat flesh is covered in pustules and ulcers. The mouth starts to dissolve. The air tube, the esophagus, the stomach, the bowels also begin to dissolve, bleed and inflame. They want to help you in giving you gelatin medicine. These are chemicals which are supposed to bind and help excrete the radioactive elements in the body, and so on and so forth. But all that is not really possible because the doctors also become sick by radioactivity. And this radiation sickness, if you are enough contaminated, is very, very awful and painful, something we can't really imagine. But it does not require a large-scale reaccident. Even in regular operation, every reactor represents a danger. Let's take the nuclear power plant Brockdorf near the Elbe, which is rather a new and modern complex, where it is allowed to discharge 6 trillions of becquerels per year in form of gases. That is a 6 with 15 zeros. Additionally, 10 billion becquerel cesium and strontium-19 are discharged. I originally planned on bringing a spoon up here with me, but I forgot. 1 spoon of strontium-90 is enough to deliver the highest permissible dosage to every person on this planet. And in the reactor there are tons of dangerous substances. If they get released, nothing can help us. When I recently was in Fessenheim, France, to present my movie, newspapers everywhere had headlines that read 53 of French men and 48 of French women developed cancer. When I was a little boy, there hardly was any cancer, and the small number of people who did develop it were usually very old, and in children, cancer was practically non-existent. Today, cancer already develops in infants. There's a study done by 14 American health institutions, published in 1967, that state, if we want to reduce the amount of cancer, there's only one method. We have to ensure that carcinogens, dangerous chemicals and radiation do not get released into the environment. But the opposite have taken place. Prior to Chernobyl, the permissible tolerance level of 1 kilogram of food was at 0.3 becquerels. After Chernobyl, it was 500. After Fukushima, it had been increased to 1,350. And now we still have the unsolved problems at Fukushima. Many people think this case is closed and under control, but it's not. In Fukushima, there's a so-called fuel storage pond, which is like a large swimming pool that contains over 1,500 fuel elements. And each fuel element contains about 250 fuel rods. Due to the cracks and fissures and explosion, there have been so-called hydrogen explosions because the radiation is splitting the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, and then it explodes. All the pillars are deteriorated. The supporting steel structures are showing, and there are fissures in the pool where water can escape. And now you have to basically dump a lot of water on top of it with water cannons, so the fuel rods do not melt. They want to pull out the fuel elements in order to bring them to another location. And so they showed us pictures of an intact spent fuel pond, which had nothing to do with Fukushima, by the way, where these fuel rods were in the process of being pulled out. But the problem with Fukushima is that the fuel elements are deformed, and some had a partial core meltdown, so they stuck together when they cooled down. If then now want to pull these out, it may happen that the upper third of the fuel element is on the hook. If I send specialists in for work and they are standing too close to the spent fuel rods, they will be deadly contaminated within minutes. So this can only be done remotely. And even robots that are used are destroyed by the radiation within a short time. It is more than questionable that the problems with the spent fuel rods can be solved. There are altogether 7,500 fuel elements, that mean roughly 1,700,000 fuel rods within that complex. And another problem is that there are tons of plutonium. Plutonium is the most dangerous substance. It is not controllable. When it gets into contact with air, it oxidizes and flies away as small particles, which can easily be breathed in, eaten or enter our body through the pores of our skin. And even the smallest amount of plutonium, less than 1/1,000,000th of a gram, will lead to cancer with a chance of 100%. But plutonium is also the stuff that bombs are made of. This is the reason why nuclear reactors are built. I have a top secret document which is no longer classified top secret. In 1957, Konrad Adenauer, the former chancellor and his minister of defense, Franz Josef Strauß, decided that we need nuclear bombs. And because of this, we ought to build nuclear reactors in order to bait the energy supplier companies. Hundreds of billions have been invested on the expense of the taxpayer. Back to Fukushima. 6 kilograms of plutonium are enough to build a Hiroshima bomb. If you dissolve it in liquids, even 1 kilo is already enough, as in the case with the so-called backpack nukes. But in Fukushima there are tons of plutonium. And then they fuse together in a core meltdown, it can explode, because there are 1,200 isotopes in a reactor, which decay and can spontaneously form explosive. The fuel rods are made from circuloid. That is the stuff you put into cameras to create the bright flash. These materials can explode, and then the plutonium is crushed together, which can result in an enormous atomic explosion. Well, not really in a real atomic bomb, because the objective there is to create a very large explosion and a minimum amount of radiation. Here we have the opposite, frankly. There will not be such an effective bang, but it would be enough to possibly vaporize the surrounding reactors, in this case 8, and to release an enormous amount of radiation. And for further accidents in Fukushima, there are already laws tucked away in drawers that will increase the permissible level to 4,000 becquerel per kilogram of food. Once again, from 0.3 to 4,000, which is 13,000 times the original value. What earlier was dangerous radioactive waste is now healthy food. Add to this, we have in Japan an amount of radiation which is 12,000 times higher than the amount of Chernobyl. So this shows us that even if these things happen at the other end of the planet, nuclear power is very dangerous. The radiation that once has escaped into the environment will never be able to be taken out again. The plutonium is washed ashore here at our beaches, then evaporates, travels upwards, rains down again, and you simply cannot control it. They want to melt the highly radioactive waste into glass cylinders, surrounded by stainless steels, and then store them in salt mines or granite. In the US, this has been done. They use the most solid granite, but plutonium travels several meters every year. And these highly active substances, for which there's no safe solution anywhere in the world, have to be kept out of the environment for 20 million years, according to the United Nations Governing Council, something that, of course, is impossible. And now, just imagine the cost of this endeavor. Already 20 years ago, American specialists have said that they calculated a sum of $4 trillion for the disposal of America's nuclear waste. $4 trillion or 4,000 billion dollars. But let us now simply calculate that we would only have one final radioactive waste disposal and only one single person guarding it at any given time. So that would mean for 24 hours, 3 people and a fourth one in the event of vacations, sick days, and educational appointments. Let's assume now that each of these people costs the management $50,000 per year, inclusive a jeep to get around, machine guns, or whatever they need to do the job. So we would come to 200,000 times 20 million years, which bring us back to the 4 trillion. The problem is, this only covers one storage facility and only one guardian. These are costs who have never been considered when it comes to a nuclear power plant. Or get this, all nuclear power plants in Germany are insured up to an amount of 3.7 billion euros. But according to the Eco-Institute Freiburg, in case of the severe accident, we would be looking at a damage of 20 to 30 trillion euro. And if all of Switzerland suddenly turns uninhabitable, this amount will further increase dramatically, not to mention the suffering of the people, who of course ultimately don't count for anything, because no insurance would ever be willingly to cover the agony and lives of million people. The Prognos Institute in Basel has calculated that if we merely increase the insurance to 18 billion euro, 1 kilowatt-hour would cost us 2 euro, solely due to the insurance. But if we increase this amount to, say, 50 trillion, 1 kilowatt-hour of nuclear power would cost us more than 1,000 euro in order to fully cover the insurance. So this is what they call the cheap nuclear power. Since nuclear power is so extremely dangerous, and there have been several inquiries about it as a result, the German Bundestag and state parliaments have publicly stated that, of course, enemies of nuclear energy are closely surveyed by the police because the risk of sabotage has to be assessed. And sabotage really is not complicated. In America, there is a General Accounting Office, which is somewhat similar to the Bundesrechnungshof, but with much more authority. They have assembled a dozen teams, consisting of 6 soldiers and specialists, and told them to go into a nuclear power plant and bring back a page of the operation manual or something else to prove that they were inside. All 12 were successful, and the power plant's operators did not notice anything. And also Greenpeace sometimes occupy a reactor. They take a ladder, cross the fence, and then they are inside, until someone comes and escorts them out later. So this is not much of an obstacle at all. And this means that the whole scenery has to be surveyed consistently and constantly. And I have my own fair share of experiences. Since 1970, I have published more than a dozen books against nuclear power, and I became a real thorn in their side. And this they let me feel. 3 occupational bans have been imposed on me. 3 attempts on my life have been made. I was forced to move to Portugal into exile for 10 years. Because I received threats that my 2 sons would likely get into an accident. I have experienced terror and all different kinds of suppression that you can imagine, but I won't want to moan about myself here. I would like to mention a few other people and how things have turned out for them. Take, for instance, Dr. Fritz Strohm, a man with a PhD in physics and high school teacher. He started to inform the farmers located around the Brockdorf nuclear power plant and taught them how dangerous this form of power really is, until they finally started protesting against it. From this point on, he has been arrested 3 times and been put into solitary confinement as terrorist. The court ruled 3 times that he would have to be released, but he still spent about 1 year of his life in jail. No trial observer have been allowed to take part in and document this trial. At all, nothing. All of this took place in a terrorism wing, in closed session, far away from prying eyes, and the public was completely excluded from these proceedings. Soon after, Strohm found himself unemployed. His job as public servant was taken from him. Robert Jung, who was also featured in my film, has been frenetically criticized by the heads of some anti-nuclear initiatives and the Green Party in Germany for his remark that nuclear energy is a super Hitler. They were boiling with rage and accused him of being a Holocaust denier and a Nazi. And they also accused me of the same thing because I refused to censor Jung. You know, 3 occupational bans have been imposed on me as a political left person. They said I was a communist. I'm not. But that changes little, because if you really want to get rid of someone, you will find a way. Robert Jung was Jewish. He is now deceased. His whole family died in the concentration camps. He survived. He is a well-known author. He received the Alternative Nobel Prize and was an election candidate in Austria for the position of federal president, where he gained a notable share of votes. He was sued in Germany because of abetment, breach of public peace, incitement for violence, and so on. And this gathered an enormous publicity. Franz Josef Strauss, who was to attend the opera ball in Vienna, was not allowed to enter. The Austrian customs officer told him that he was wanted a man in Austria on charges of breach of the public peace, incitement of violence, and so forth. The same happened to a Bavarian business delegation. Robert Jenck was finally acquitted, and all charges were dropped. Next, I want to mention Helga Vohwinkel, a senior headmaster, quite conservative, who sued the nuclear power plant Mülheim-Kärlich because it was built on top of an earthquake fault line, and the court has accepted the motion. The reactor could not go online. Shortly after, Mrs. Vohwinkel's door was kicked early in the morning. Then a bag was pulled over her head. She was tied up and dragged down the stairs by her feet so that her head would hit every single step on the staircase. She got arrested later until her lawyer came and she had to be released. I'm just giving you a few examples of the many thousand cases there are. Another case, Frieda Wagner is an award-winning director who won the Grimme Prize in Silver and Gold, the European Television Award, and many more. For years he had worked and produced for ARD and ZDF, that are Germany's largest state-owned television broadcasting stations. Then he created another movie, Deadly Dust. Most people don't know this. The radioactive waste from the reprocessing plant and from the enrichment plants, in this case, they are contaminated even with plutonium, is used for warheads so that they can penetrate the armor of tanks, or it can be used to detonate a bomb in deep shelter, as for instance in iron. If simply penetrates down through the floors, and the resulting friction heats it up to 5,000 degrees until it explodes. This causes the formation of small nanoparticles which are easily carried away by the wind. Their fallout covers our fields of wheat, lakes, or they enter our bodies. They attack our cells. They are not controllable in any way, and they have a half-life of 4.5 billion years. The Allies, in the so-called democratic wars, in the past, they justified it to be for God and fatherland. Today they call it for humanity and democracy, have used these weapons in Libya, Kosovo, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. We could see the consequences of this right after the First War in Iraq, where the cancer has increased 30 times. The rate of crippled newborns with deformations, who we have just seen in the trailer, has grown 50-fold. So Frieda Wagner has made this film in collaboration with Sir Professor Dr. He has 6 doctor degrees, Horst Siegfried Günther. Horst Siegfried Günther was an officer and was sent to a concentration camp in the Third Reich because of resistance against the Führer. But he wasn't shot because it was believed that he would die anyway due to the many shrapnel fragments in his body, but he didn't. Later, he lived in the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, and was sent to North Africa, where he treated government members, ministers, prime ministers, and so on. He also went to Iraq, Iran, Syria, Egypt, and many other countries. His books were taught to medical students, and he built hospitals in North Africa. For years, he also worked with Albert Schweitzer and Lambarin. He has done research in Great Britain, where he was nobled by the English Queen. He has earned the highest awards in 30 different countries, and is a honorary citizen of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and has been nominated for the Nobel Prize multiple times. It's sufficient to say that we are dealing with a honorable man of whom every German should be proud. But after he uncovered the uranium ammunition scandal, he was immediately arrested and had 3 attempts on his life. The third time, a cross-country vehicle without a license plate hit him on the sidewalk close to Pullach near Munich. This is where the German intelligence service BND is located. The car had crossed the bike lane and smashed into him with full force on the sidewalk. He was seriously injured. The driver of the car did a hit and run. Horst Sigvard Günther has never recovered from this. Today he lives in a nursing home near Husum. So this is what happens when nuclear opponents and other people bring attention to these topics. They are taken out. And this has nothing to do with democracy. Germany is no democracy. I have advised the chairman of the US Senate Committee on Government Operation and multiple senators who have told me, you are an American military dictatorship until the year 2099. And until then, you will speak American and be made in our image and be part of the US. And recently we learned about the NSA scandal and all the shenanigans that they survey Angela Merkel's phone. I mean, what a joke. Obama is just standing there in front of Merkel and Friedrich, Minister of the Interior, and they all claim, we are only surveying terrorists. And suddenly, they were the terrorists. And I mean, we have got these judgments from the highest sources. But Mrs. Merkel did not conceal that the German intelligence services are the best snoopers in the world, and they survey everything. My phone is tapped. My internet has been turned off. So the journalist Christoph Hörstel, who is here with us today, has written about this on the internet regarding my phone. Every time I talk politics on the phone with someone, it is turned off for hours, sometimes days, depending on what I've said. Then he published this on the internet. 80,000 clicks in 2 days. A lot of negative emails to the German Telecom. Threats that people would cancel their contracts, and well, since then I haven't had any problems with my telephone, but still with the internet. Mrs. Merkel, like every other chancellor, has to sign the so-called Chancellor's File, where she has to swear absolute obedience and service to America. As I've said in other interviews, I'm calling for Mrs. Merkel to make the Chancellor's File public and what has been signed along with it to prove that I'm wrong. Back in the days of Willy Brandt, he refused to sign it, and he was told he could not become Chancellor if he did not sign this paper because America calls the shots in Germany. Obama has said this rather clearly. Germany is an occupied country, and it will remain so. And Mr. Schäuble, who had to step down twice because of corruption, the first time with the so-called Flick affair, the second time because he had accepted envelopes with several 100,000 in cash from a weapon lobbyist. This apparently qualified him to become finance minister, where he's now trusted with hundreds of billions. I mean, really, isn't that insane? Schäuble acknowledged that Germany has not been sovereign for 1 minute since 1945. That is correct. However, when you see how they are drawing around, the politicians, the journalists, no one dares to write about it, to be honest. None. We are systematically being lied to in all areas. And as if that wasn't enough already, here's more. The United Nations Human Rights Committee has confirmed to us in 2011 that we are no democracy and that we are violating literally all human rights. In the General Command number 35 it is stated, all forms of opinion are protected, including opinions of a political, scientific, historic, moral or religious nature. It is incompatible with paragraph 1 to criminalize the holding of an opinion, the harassment, intimidation or stigmatization of a person, including arrest, detention, trial or imprisonment for reasons of the opinions they may hold, constitute a violation of Article 19, Paragraph 1a. Another segment reads, laws that penalize the expression of opinions about historical facts are incompatible with the obligations that the Covenant imposes on states parties in relation to the respect for freedom of opinion and expression. The Covenant does not permit general prohibition of expression. We all know that Mr. Mahler was sentenced to 12 years. That is more than most murders get in Germany. Now, I'm not of the same opinion as Mr. Mahler, but I think in a democracy, it should be the most common thing to have the right to your own opinion, so that it can be discussed afterwards. So the United Nations have confirmed to us that we are no democracy. We disregard human rights, and we all know, whether it comes to the allegation of radicality about Eva Hermann, who has been labeled right-wing, or the strong allegations about left-wing Günter Grass, whoever has an opinion and dares to express it publicly is slaughtered by the German media, and I also had some experience of my own after I made the film. But there's something else I have to mention. 1.5 years ago, we presented my film to important people in the media industry. And they said to us, the movie is great, but it's far too critical for Germany. You will not get any financial support, no distribution company. You will not be allowed to attend any film festivals. It will not be shown in any movie, theater or television. And the media will not say a word about it and hush it up. But probably the most painful thing will be your own people will stab you in the back, because there are many people from the German services and the nuclear power lobby undercover. We know this by now. I have 2 reports by the nuclear power lobby from a PR agency. The reports show in 40 pages each how representatives are bought and how cheap they are. The Environmental Board of the Bundestag, €5,000 per person. Can you imagine that? Those are peanuts, not a pile of money, but merely change. Or the way they have bought off the newspapers. The Green Party and the TASS newspaper are praised for their efforts to cooperate with the nuclear lobby. The report lists prominent figures, scientists and others, and what their price tag was. I noticed that when I published the movie. Technology in reactors, well, we can see how easily technology can fail. And because of this, nuclear reactors can never be trusted on. They will never be safe. When I published this movie, there was a big wave of hate. They called me an enemy of foreigners, a Nazi, Holocaust denier. They said I had horns and so on. The head of the Green Party state directorates of Schleswig-Holstein and Lower Saxony have even threatened the movie theaters, the alternative and program theaters that would show the movie. They said they would boycott those theaters in the future if they showed the movie. I have to add here that the Green Party's concept originally came from me. I have held 200 lectures in the 1970s in that regard, and in 1978 I became top candidate for the colored lists in Hamburg, which consisted of 200 politically left initiatives, and my purple-colored leather overall, lederhosen, that I always wore became a symbol for the women's movement. Because we had as many male candidates as female for the first time in German history. Let's face it, I could also have been born as a woman. Nobody has a choice. There's absolutely no single reason to favor, criminalize, or judge a gender differently from the other. And now, the Green Party of today wants pretty much the exact opposite of what we wanted to achieve back in the days ago. Environmental protection has become nothing but a redistribution from poor to rich. Surely carbon dioxide is a factor in climate change, but it has turned into a huge business. Billions are moved from one place to the other by banks and cashed in by the states. And finally, all that is done with the so-called biodiesel and stuff like that. It's a huge swindle, and it destroys nature in a way we cannot even imagine. Everything that is being done there has really only one goal: to take money away from us. And we are seeing the dramatic decline in our living standard. 1980, I worked as a teacher and earned a net income of 4,400 Deutschmark. I lived in a 200 square meter Art Nouveau apartment in Hamburg-Eppendorf, one of the most noble districts of the city, on where I paid 880 a month, including heating costs. No teacher could afford something like this with their gross income today. Young people, young academics, doctors in Hamburg today are barely able to afford a 100 square meter apartment with running costs. And then there's no money left for food, a car, not to mention a family. Also, we are seeing that some people, for example, Roma coming from Bulgaria, with documents stating that a 20-year-old woman has 20 kids, and this is officially acknowledged here. How this is biologically possible, I have no idea. These people come to us through the European Union because of economic reasons, the so-called economic refugees. And the Minister of the Interior, Mr. Friedrich, says that this is a scandal and that we must not tolerate it. But then I ask why he has ever signed these laws at all. Shouldn't he have known what the result would be? In 1997, Business Week had already warned that millions of Romas live in misery. They all want to move to Germany for social health. I have written a book against the European Union back there. Already in 1995, I had written 6 books against the European Union. European Union, disaster of the environment, dictatorship, Euro disaster, and so on. None of them were allowed to be published. And, okay, how much do I have left? Did I already speak for too long? In case I can stop. The European Union is the mafia. Over there, I have 2 books about it. I have lived in Portugal for a long time, and have wondered why the people in the south literally hate the Germans so much. They really hate us. Despite in Italy, Spain, and Portugal, they never had a problem with Nazis and so on. They were themselves fascist dictatorships. And in part, I can relate to this hate. For example, Portugal, where I lived for years. Half a year ago, federal ministers of the Exterior, Finance and Economic resigned their post, citing the reason that Portugal should leave the European Union and the euro of the country would never get back up on its feet again. So they wanted people to vote on their own destiny. But the president of Portugal, Cavaco Silva, who had already been chancellor before, owned a bank that went nearly bankrupt. He received 8 billion from the Germans and restructured the bank before he sold it for billions to an Angolan businessman. And Cavaco Silva, as president, denied his permission for elections. You have no choice. I won't step down. I refuse. Now the Portuguese blame us. You have ruined our economy. You have downgraded the Deutschmark in relation to the euro. And you have forced down the wages so far that we can no longer keep up. Additionally, in Greece, 600,000 academics have left the country. The same happened in Spain and Portugal. And these people despise us. I know in Portugal, hunters shoot Germans in the face with a shotgun. Tires are pierced, houses burned. The boundary stones are moved to your disadvantage, and so on. And if you complain, the land registry office shows up and tells you your real estate is much smaller than registered. You have to pay 10,000 euro. Other Germans get their house torn down in Mallorca, and they ask, "Why have you torn down my house?" They reply instead, "You owe us 60,000 euro for the demolition." But why? When I bought the house, you have confirmed that everything is perfectly fine. Well, that was an error, which means he has not paid enough bribe money. Even Boris Becker and Claudia Schiffer have experienced this. I mean, they impose a pass upon your property and tell you, our ancestors have walked this path forever. Then they fence it off and demand 600,000 euros for the right of way. And if you want to keep the property, you have to pay. And everyone cheers in joy, the judges and everybody hoaxing, when another stupid German got his legs pulled. So that is what the euro did to us. The euro cannot work, never. And we are not even allowed to talk about it. If you want to learn more about this in the back, you can get my books Banking Mafia with 200 pages and 875 literature sources. And the things you can read in, they are unbelievable. The book features many prominent politicians, so honest and shocking that it's hard to grasp. And if we see that the orchestrated press doesn't speak or write a single word on this and hushes all these things up. So I would like to say a few final words. There is always the question, what are we doing here? What is the meaning of life? Are we just here for no reason? Just by accident? Whatever the case may be, I believe there are two reasons. To be happy, which is not always easy, as we all know, but you can kind of learn to improve it. And the second is to fight for life. I mean, everyone is looking for some kind of sense and meaning in their life, and you will not find that within consumption. And after all the harassments I have experienced and the other problem, I still owe 40,000 euro because of the movie. But I'm not sorry. I'm doing something meaningful. I'm fighting for life. Because there's only one decision, life or death. There is no alternative. We have to act. We have to do something. We have to fight for life for us and our children.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you very, very much. We are feeling again. This man has really touched on a lot of things deeply. I am not sure how much of what he has said is, shall I say, legally covered. Some points may make certain people want to put a noose around his neck or ours. Nevertheless, there was so much information presented here that has really moved us. All these problems. One almost feels like a villain just knowing the truth, do you agree? The fear someone could run amok and start some sort of dangerous protest action. When I think of the people who are in charge of security and other people's safety, I can of course relate to this fear somewhat, but also remember the words from my introduction. It is very important what we, the AZK attendees and volunteers, what we all have in our hearts. We will not sabotage anything with machine guns or God knows what. Instead, we will fight with the weapon of the word. And I think this is exactly what Dr. Strohm has done here today. He fought well with the weapon of the word. We have to be informed about what is happening, and we have to let it into our hearts. And the people has to come to a new attitude, to a truly democratic decision, so that we can all direct this huge issue. But that requires a large amount of work. It requires you, it requires everyone.